he takes Medea with him and they run away together.
That he has essentially not told her, abandoned her, abandoned their kids.
He goes through with the marriage, but Medea won't stand for that. She gets her revenge.
She sort of participates in one of the things that we see commonly in this period, which is an attempt to escape her enslavement.
But then, as she thinks it through, she decides she's going to kill her own children.
And I sort of think about it as, is there a time when I would think that there is a situation of, is it better for my child to be dead than alive? My name is Dr. Sidner Roy, and I am an assistant professor of classics in the humanities department here at Marshall University. Medea is a figure from ancient Greek myth. She sort of is an ancient story about a princess from the sort of mythical, semi-mythical land of Colchis, which in modern day we usually put in the country of Georgia on the Black Sea. Her father is a son of a god, so she is sort of descended from gods.
So Jason, Greek guy, goes to get the golden fleece. Part of that is he ends up marrying Medea, who helps him succeed in his task of getting the golden fleece. But he takes Medea with him and they run away together. And as part of this deed of getting the golden fleece, Medea ends up killing her own brother. There's no going back for her to her family because she's betrayed her father and she's killed her brother. So now Jason is the only family she has.
Because her story goes on is that she and Jason sort of get married, and she helps Jason through various, let's say, obstacles that he needs to overcome. But in the end, they end up in a city called Corinth, and there Jason decides, after they've lived quietly for 10 years and they've had 2 kids, Jason decides to leave her and marry the princess of Corinth, and that means abandoning her, abandoning their children. In some versions of the myth, she gets revenge by killing the princess and the king of the city of Corinth that Jason is leaving her for, and in retaliation, the people of Corinth kill her children. But in other versions of the story, she kills her children. And then, to escape the consequences, she gets on a chariot pulled by dragons and escapes to have more adventures in the city of Athens and in the Far East.
My name is Cicero M. Fain III. I am currently the Assistant Provost of Inclusive Excellence at Marshall University. My personal account of Margaret Gardner is she was a person of agency. It's just a remarkable story of courage and bravery, sacrifice. I can only conjecture as to the internal transcripts of her internal dialogue.
Margaret Garner was an enslaved woman who lived in the 1840s and 50s, born in 1830s, but through into the 1850s. She was enslaved on a plantation in northern Kentucky in Boone County. Most likely, she was the child of an enslaved woman. She was most likely the product of rape, and as was sort of common during this time period. However, she'd sort of carved out a life of hers for herself, a little bit of one, on her plantation, in that she was married, and she had children of her own. Though those children, whether or not they were the marriage to her husband, Robert Garner, and there's a lot more complexities to, let's say, the legal status of marriage for enslaved people in the United States in the 19th century, but that is generally referred to as Robert Garner as her husband. And so she has a number of children, generally 4. She sort of participates in one of the things that we see commonly in this period, which is an attempt to escape her enslavement.
With, family, community members, her children and husband, makes it up to visit, goes to Cincinnati, just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, crosses the river, I believe, in the dead of winter, and the river was frozen over, one of the coldest winters ever, and they were able to cross over on the ice to get to freedom in Cincinnati, outside of Cincinnati, stays with a cousin, and lives their life free for months.
And make it to a hopeful, safe house in Cincinnati. But the issue for her at this point is that under the Fugitive Slave Act, it used to be that if you made it as an enslaved person to a state where slavery was outlawed, then essentially you had status of a free person. So you just needed to make it to Ohio.
The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 just expanded the scope and the scale of the federal government's involvement to the point where you had the development of U.S. Marshals. Not only could you have slave catchers utilized and employed, but you also had U.S. Marshals who were empowered to assist in retrieving the freedom seeker.
And so what happens is they get to what they think is a safe house, but they are, she and her family are tracked down by U.S. Marshals. And once they're sort of, she realizes that she is trapped, and the U.S. Marshals are sort of waiting to capture her and her family and her children. She injures her children and kills her youngest.
She's going to kill the remaining 3 children, but she is captured before she can do that.
After this happens, she sort of becomes a news sensation that people are like, oh man, this woman murdered her own children. She is imprisoned in Ohio and becomes kind of a lawsuit develops around her because Ohio would like to keep her and charge her with murder. There's news stories about what happens to her. She is, and then one of the common things that we see is that she is referred to as a modern Medea. And that, because, there's the parallel that she killed her own child, just like this mythical figure Medea did as well. And the interesting thing is that this calling her that is that this term for her was used by both people who were pro-slavery, because they were like, look, Medea was a monster, Margaret Garner was a monster. This justifies the enslavement because, this is such a monstrous act. What happens to someone when your options have been closed out? But I think what I see as the parallel between the two is that when there are systems of oppression, that those are both can be enacted in reality, so that this is through force and physical domination, actual restraint. But those are also enacted psychologically. It's parallel to a physical, in chains sort of oppression, if that makes sense. And so that I think what Medea's situation perhaps shows us is how far one can kind of accept oppression, but then also the line on where one rejects it. And that I think that also in many ways is what happens for Garner, is that there's a degree of, I mean, she is rejecting her oppression by escaping from enslavement, but that it is still large in her mind. And that I think that is part of why she kills her children, is because she knows the reality. It's still very real in her mind. And I think for Medea, we could see part of that as a factor in how and why she chooses a monstrous act. We're not supposed to excuse the act of killing your children, but we are supposed to say, why would anyone think this is okay? Oh, because there maybe is something that is even more inexcusable, which is like systemic enslavement in a society. And so it's like two horrible things. So for me, oh goodness, I hope that I never have to be there, because that would just mean that something has become very wrong. And I think that, anyone who can imagine that the death would be better than where they are, we can also look at this as like deep depression, but also if it's real, that is something that's very wrong.